On this episode of Things That Matter, Pastor Brian recommends 5 great podcasts that you might want to check out. Welcome to this week's episode of Things That Matter. My name is Josh Taransky. This is Pastor Brian Brodersen of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. Each week we come to you with a new episode on a topic that matters for you in your own ministry or Christian life. Thanks for tuning in. Share these episodes with your friends and family on social media and give us feedback as we go along. We'd love to hear from you. In today's episode, we want to talk about 5 of your podcasts. So podcasts are an audio file that you have an app. The app goes out and it retrieves new episodes for that particular show.
Right.
And so this has been around for pastors and their sermons for years. I mean, probably pastors were some of the early adopters for podcasting back in 2006, I think, when iTunes started making a platform for podcasts. But we're now 10 years in, and there are many shows out there, not just sermons and not just secular shows, but there's a lot of good content that's out there.
Yeah.
So you have some podcasts that you listen to.
Yeah, right.
The first one here I have is Signpost with Russ More.
Yeah.
Tell me about that one.
I like his take on things. He wrote a book that's fairly recent, a book called Onward, in which he looks at Christians engaging the culture at this time. But he is the president of the ERLC, which stands for Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, based in Washington, D.C., and formerly of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He was the dean there, I think. But anyway, Russ is just, he's a, Bible scholar. He's a very capable expositor, but he's got a really good grasp on kind of what's happening culturally as well. So he intertwines, his biblical knowledge and understanding with just different cultural things. And a lot of it is just fun stuff. Sometimes he'll talk about, I remember he did one episode on Star Wars, that when Star Wars recently came out with a new one, and just the way he played off of that. And he had some good dots that he connected, for people in ministry. And so he'll do that. He'll do something. He's a big country music fan. He's a big Johnny Cash fan, so he'll do something on country music. But he's extremely solid biblically. And, he's from Louisiana, so he's got kind of a down-home approach to things. So I just enjoy it. And he has informative.
Significant role in Washington, D.C., speaking into political
significant
things.
Role. I mean, I follow him on Twitter, Instagram. I'll see him in the White House with Obama there. He's, in a conversation with the president. And I think, well, God bless this guy. That's awesome. Yeah. So I just like his take on things.
Okay, so Signpost with Russ More is the first one. The second one here on the list is the Acts 29 podcast.
Acts 29 podcast, yeah. I like the Acts 29 podcast because they just bring in a lot of different guys from all different kinds of backgrounds to talk about, most of the time they're talking about ministry. They're talking about, maybe church planting, or they're talking about ministry philosophy, or they're talking about, things that are just, I think, interesting and relevant to guys in pastoral ministry. So I'll listen, and a lot of times I'll just think, I've never even heard of the person that they're featuring on the podcast, but they've got some good insights.
So those sermons or those interviews?
No, they're interviews mostly.
And what's the length of time, runtime for those?
They're about, why did I do that? What was that? They're about 30 minutes.
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
Great. The next one on the list here is...
I told you we were going to have fun in this.
A jovial one, yes.
A jovial one, yeah.
Okay, so number 3 is Tim Keller.
Tim Keller.
And his sermon podcast.
Yeah. Gospel in Life. And I listen to those really just to get my own personal edification. I love Tim's teaching. I think it's excellent. And so it's kind of my way of just getting some, outside, somebody else, preaching, and me, just receiving it as a Christian and just wanting to get my own soul refreshed, and I just really enjoy his preaching.
And he usually preaches for 30, 35 minutes.
Yeah, 35 minutes.
Yeah, good. Okay, the next one on the list here is Quantum Solace.
Yeah.
Is that 007 Quantum Solace?
Quantum of Solace. Now, this is an interesting one. This is a friend of mine, David Robertson. He's based in Scotland. And this is a fun podcast. I mean, it cracks me up all the time because they've got just this really funky music. Before they go into a segment, they'll always play a song that kind of relates to it. And they'll pull out some of the wackiest songs, from the 60s and stuff. And I always marvel at their creativity with that. David Robertson and Al Smith is his co-hosts there. And one of the reasons I really enjoy that podcast is because it's based in the UK, it's based in Scotland, but David's usually covering things that have to do with, Britain in a more general sense. I mean, he focuses many times on Scotland, but also Europe. So it kind of keeps me abreast of just, current things that are happening in the UK and Europe that I want to stay abreast of because of my involvement there. So,
yeah. Well, I've heard it. The music is pretty funky. Yes, it's pretty amazing. Okay, and the last one here, number 5, is The Briefing with Al Mohler.
Yeah. The Briefing with Al Mohler is, if you want to just stay informed on what's happening in the culture and understand it through a Christian worldview, because that's his whole take on everything. He's looking at everything from a Christian worldview. Al is, the guy is amazing. He's brilliant. He's bringing you all the latest stuff from the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and every other newspaper that's writing things that have some bearing, not just on society, but some bearing on believers as well and on the church. So I think as far as just keeping up with the news for the day, that is a great way to keep up with the news of what's kind of going on and things that are relevant, So I use it as a basically just to stay informed on what's going on culturally.
So when do you get to listen to podcasts?
In the morning. It's a morning. Actually, it's a good question. So I drive back and forth to do my run. So I'll listen to the podcast during that time. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, those are great lists. And again, we're also on podcast. If you want to subscribe to our show, we have our own podcast. Just search for Things That Matter. It'll pop up each week as each episode is produced. And if you have a question about these, or if you'd like to recommend a podcast in the comments below, we'd love to read your comments and recommendations. And so do that for us. And also share these episodes with your friends and family. We always appreciate that. Rate us on iTunes if you are listening to the podcast. Thanks for tuning in this week to Things That Matter. God bless.